Kiwis like to complain about.
Passengers at Auckland Airport are being warned of extensive delays due to an
And Kiwis love to complain about.
So what do you do when Air New Zealand fully cancel your flight? You have a big rant about it.
$800 to get from Melbourne to Auckland, that is on sale. I just need another airline to come in and take over the monopoly from Air New Zealand.
But for the past year, the airport and the airlines have been complaining about each other.
Because it is actually the least competitive market in New Zealand. It's worse than banks, it's worse than groceries.
Auckland Airport prices are the millstone around the neck of aviation pricing.
Both sides want the other reviewed by regulators, so what's going on? Welcome to the NBR Podcast. I'm your host, Simon Shepherd. Before the end of this month, the Commerce Commission will deliver a ruling on whether proposed price hikes by Auckland Airport are justified. Happens every 5 years, but this cycle has seen a war of words. Auckland Airport is undertaking a massive $6.6 billion upgrade, new terminal, transport hub, runway resilience. So who pays? Well, the user does. That's the airlines, and through them, the passengers. Airlines are not happy with how the prices are set and regulated. Here's Air New Zealand CEO Greg Foran on the podcast last year.
If we don't agree with what needs to be spent, it's sort of too bad.
Well,
get on with it.
Over you, don't they?
I would say they have a very good monopoly over us. Difficult for us to land our planes anywhere else.
And this is Auckland Airport CEO Carrie Hurahanganui in response.
86% market share in the least competitive domestic market in the world. That feels like you'd want to understand and interrogate that a little bit more.
So, with a lot of trepidation, we've decided to try and understand what's happening.
We have 3 regulated airports in our system, Auckland, Wellington and Christchurch, and they run through this information disclosure regime governed by the Commerce Commission.
This is Billy Moore from Industry Association New Zealand Airports.
They have to consult on pricing, and every time they do, the Commerce Commission will review, did they do it well enough, did they do their consultation sufficiently, and is their rate of return appropriate for what they're trying to achieve. And the reason why it's set up this way is because lawmakers, when this was first developed and when it's been reviewed over time, which it has been, recognised that in this system there are 2 parties with quite different ways of looking at the world. We have our airlines, which, airline is a tough business. They're thinking short term, they're trying to keep their businesses going. Airports are thinking much more long term. So they're master planners, they think 30 years in advance, and they're trying to build infrastructure to meet demand and build capacity over time. The way I would usually describe it is if everyone was happy, something would be wrong. It would be too cosy. So I see it as a healthy tension. Obviously, it does get a bit dramatic at times, but it's important to acknowledge that the tension exists for a reason, and the system isn't necessarily bad just because the airlines don't like it.
The thing is, the airlines really don't like it.
The challenge we have is that airports are able to set prices, as the law says, as they see fit.
Kath O'Brien is from Barnes. It represents the airlines.
And that means that they set the price, they nominally consult, often change very little, and then set the price, and then airlines must pay. And then there is no contract or terms of service or anything else that keeps the parties kind of honest between each other.
Right, so you're saying that there are no conditions that they have to meet, that the airlines just have to pay, or the airport basically sets?
Yes, so the airport can set any price at any ceiling and can also target a commercial return at more or less any price according to boundaries.
Yeah.
And then can deliver that service haphazardly without contract.
But they would argue that's not true because it is subject to Commerce Commission oversight.
Yes, so the regime is called information disclosure for a reason. It is information that is disclosed annually about the airport's activities. And that is essentially the extent of the oversight. The Commerce Commission also looks at the pricing when it's set, usually 18 months to 2 years after the fact by the time we get the final decision, and gives an opinion about that pricing. But there is no teeth or no ability for the Commission to direct any changes about the pricing.
Which brings us to something called Price Setting Event 4, or PSE 4. It covers Auckland Airport's proposed price rises between 2023 and 2027. Auckland Airport obviously wants a decent return on its massive infrastructure upgrade, which means landing prices rise for airlines. In its draft report on PSE 4, the Commerce Commission found two things. The proposed size of the build seemed reasonable, but the proposed price hikes could see Auckland Airport make around $200 million in excess profits. Here's Billy Moore again.
We're waiting for the final report. We have to see what comes out in that final process, and it is a robust process. Everyone puts in submissions. We also have a cross-submission process, so airports, airlines and other stakeholders can see what everyone said and dispute it. So I find that really robust.
Billy Moore also says the ComCom has based its assessment on an old 2016 formula. It should be on a more recent pricing formula that takes into account the COVID years.
There was always going to be a bit of a disconnect between what Auckland Airport tried to do and what the ComCom's opinion was. And so part of the process now with the ComCom's report is to bring that together and come to a final view.
There is one more view. While the airports believe the current system is working, airlines want a reset. Here's Kath O'Brien.
Certainly, Auckland Airport prices are the millstone around the neck of aviation pricing at the moment.
Okay.
They are more than all of the customs and biosecurity and airways charges put together for a flight that might come into and depart from Auckland Airport.
You want a different kind of regulation. You're advocating for that. Can you tell me in lay terms how you think that pricing at Auckland Airport and the other regulated airports, or is it just Auckland Airport that you want changed?
Yeah, look, first of all, I would say that we have a pricing problem with Auckland Airport more than we have with any other airport. That is mostly to do with the size and scale of the capital costs that they would like to spend.
Yeah.
So I think that's the first thing, that it is an Auckland problem that we have. And then the second thing is, again, because it's significant monopoly position and the effect that that pricing has on the rest of the aviation network, given that just about every flight into and out of New Zealand comes through Auckland Airport, including domestically, that airport should have a better form of oversight over it than just the information disclosure.
Right.
It should have another form of regulation available under the Commerce Act that would give us better oversight and better confidence that the spend committed to is right and that the oversight of the effect of that pricing on the system is appropriate.
Kath O'Brien points to how electricity grid operator Transpower is regulated. The Commerce Commission sets price and quality benchmarks. The airports, not keen.
What problem are we trying to solve? The process is happening. We're going to get the report through, and Auckland Airport may or may not adjust its outcome. It's going to have to evaluate that. So I'm not convinced that the system isn't already working. It's fit for purpose. It's been reviewed as recently as a couple of years ago. Why is aviation a bit different from things like electricity regulation? It is different in the way it's managed, the way the infrastructure is managed, the consumer-facing relationship. There's lots of complications to that. And look,
nobody's
airports
disputing
and
it. This
airlines
is very
should continue
complex.
to get around the table on what could be done better every time we do these pricing rounds. But I'm not
Okay.
convinced that the system isn't fit for purpose now.
Okay. Caught in the middle of this head-spinning regulatory roundabout is the passenger.
Well, there's no doubt there is a tipping point when costs keep going up.
Brett Thomas is the chair of the Travel Agents Association and commercial director for the House of Travel.
We need to make sure that those airports are not charging a significant amount which impacts on the amount of people travelling. The key for that also is from an inbound point of view. New Zealand's one of the biggest export earners, of course, is tourism. So we don't want to be seen as an expensive place to come because people have over 200 countries they can visit in the world. New Zealand is a long way away from most of our destinations. So if the cost of going through an airport is too great, customers will look elsewhere. And we've seen that in the past in places like the UK, where they raised the cost of going through the airport significantly, and people did turn off for a while. And as I say, New Zealand has got, people coming to New Zealand have got choices.
Are we pricing ourselves out of the market now because we are through a whole range of things? There's the visitor levy. There's obviously, airport services charges that are going up. Then, of course, there's the redevelopment of airports. And then, of course, there's been ongoing capacity constraints with airlines. Are all these combining together to price New Zealand out of that international market?
It's one of those situations you just don't know what the tipping point is, because customers may choose to go somewhere else, but no one surveys necessarily to find out exactly what that tipping point was. But we do need to be careful, and we need to be conscious that people don't have unlimited funds. So it's a balancing act for the airports and airlines to get a good customer experience through the airport at a reasonable cost. But part of that also comes from the government, where things like customs, making sure we can get through those security bases in a really seamless and efficient manner too.
It is a very complex system. Can I just ask about the domestic flights and the domestic routes? The perception is that they are expensive, and they could become more expensive if airports have to charge more. What is the feedback to your members?
Well, most definitely there is issues in terms of the domestic, in terms of pricing, but also in terms of the amount of rescheduling that's happening at the moment, or the issue in terms of on-time performance, which being suboptimal as well at this stage. So there's definitely an issue from a domestic point of view, and we are seeing that resistance to some of the pricing that is being charged domestically. Particularly in the corporate space, we're getting that feedback now that domestic travel in times is often more expensive than, say, travelling to Australia, which is sort of hard to believe.
It's hard to believe. And you're getting that particularly in the corporate area at the moment.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, when there's a cost of living crisis, it affects people, but it affects businesses as well. And businesses are looking at that and going, that's quite expensive. Are there alternatives? So, it is something we need to be careful of. Because air travel is a very important part to New Zealand, both from an income point of view, but also just the connectivity between businesses and people. So we need to make it sure that it is affordable and priced correctly.
A ticket price is made up of many separate charges: landing fees, airport security, air traffic control, customs, quarantine, and of course the actual seat on the plane. But a passenger only feels the pain when they buy the ticket. And when you have one dominant player, that's where the focus lands. And that's where Billy Moore from NZ Airports wants change, a market study into the domestic aviation sector.
So New Zealand has no data about the domestic market, and it strikes us as particularly challenging because it is actually the least competitive market in New Zealand. It's worse than banks, it's worse than groceries, and yet those are the areas that get most of the attention. Air New Zealand now has 84% of the domestic market, and I think 80% of their routes are monopolies in the regions. Mm-hmm. And look, Air New Zealand is a rational actor. Us asking these questions should not be about criticising their behaviour. They are running their business the best way that they see fit. But the domestic market in New Zealand is very unusual. It is almost the least competitive in the world. Bolivia is the worst at 93%. And it's time for us to think about what that means for our economy, for regional development, particularly during this period of time where Air New Zealand is contracting. We've lost about 1.5 million seats in the network since 2019. So our network's getting smaller, and for all the goals we have for this country, economic growth, international connectivity, regional growth, that has a huge effect on our ability to aspire for better outcomes in our community.
And here's Kath O'Brien's opinion.
That is a distraction technique away from what is the biggest problem we have here. We have an airport that is committed to substantial spend and has started to build it. We can't get away from it. And those rising prices are causing are flatlining in part of aviation demand. We don't have new international airlines coming to New Zealand, and one of the reasons for that is because of the rise of prices at Auckland Airport. And far be it from anyone to suggest that the prices are too high, because really we can't get out of that now because the build is underway. It's a big problem, and I think the suggestion that we should regulate an airline because of their position in the market is actually just a distraction from the real problem.
Right. Public perception is that Air New Zealand charges too much, especially domestically. And it seems to be what the airports are, backing with their argument. So what harm could there be in having a domestic aviation study anyway? Could this not address this perception that it's the airlines or the airports? Just throw some light on it.
Yeah, look, I think the first thing I'd say is that I can't speak on behalf of Air New Zealand and how they run their business. What I would observe is that first, the New Zealand domestic aviation market is actually open to any airline from Australia to come and fly here if they so wish. That's why we have Jetstar. It's actually quite unusual in the world for countries to allow foreign carriers to operate domestic transport inside of their own nations. Domestically, we've had Jetstar operate. At the moment, they only operate on the trunk routes.
Yeah.
And I think, them not operating regional routes has been a decision for them. But I would suggest that if it was commercially profitable, airlines from Australia would rush to do it. And they do not.
So it's a basic economics argument.
Yeah, well, I think you've got to remember that New Zealand is the size of Sydney. So the population of New Zealand is the same size as Sydney. We have 20-something airports. You can more or less drive, to an airport within about a 2-hour drive, no matter where you are in New Zealand. We are well served with air connectivity. And that's a good thing because, we are isolated, we have an unusual geography.
Yep.
We do need air connections.
Yeah, we do, but we need affordable air connections.
Yes.
And there is the public gripe that regional prices are outrageous.
Yeah, and again, I can't speak for how Air New Zealand sets its prices, but, I would observe that we are open to competition and could have it if it was to arrive.
Is there not a chilling effect of one major player having access and maybe even owning some of the sort of the baggage infrastructure and those kinds of things? Is that a chilling effect to another competitor coming in?
Yeah, look, I don't think that it is. Certainly Jetstar has done it and does do it. So I don't think the facts would tell us that it is.
Right.
Otherwise Jetstar wouldn't be here.
And so the aviation sector waits for the Commerce Commission decision on Auckland Airport prices. To be fair, the airport has said it will amend its charges if the Commission says so. And then, with that settled, the sector can do the merry-go-round once more, starting in 2027. And that wraps up this episode of the NBR Podcast. Links to social media clips used are in the description. Thanks to content producers Joseph Hisayasu and Jake Latham. For early access to new episodes, you can subscribe on Spotify, or for all the business news, go to nbr.co.nz. Next episode, managing Kiwis' retreat from building in dumb places. I'm Simon Shepherd. We'll catch you then.